Context-wise, the QES is the largest independent business survey in the UK. It takes the results from 53 accredited chambers around the country and feeds them into one man only, David Bharier at the British Chamber of Commerce. And I'll let David explain what happens then with those results. I think we could all appreciate that the last quarter's survey fed us some information about the direction of travel. I think we all anticipated that when you shut an economy down, you're going to see some pretty steep graphs in the downwards direction, less so the depth, but we got some depth from that. This one I think is particularly interesting because it gives us an idea of the direction of travel of the economy. And you know, the trajectory of where we're going, easy for me to say. Hopefully it'll understand and give us a bit more information about what we should be considering as we're moving forward, maybe when to bring staff back, when to look at raw materials and supply chains, and give us hopefully an idea of where we're going. So we are supported, as we have been with every QES this year, by Barclays. I'm going to hand over to Nick Porter from Barclays. He's the area business manager. So over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, so for those that don't know me, I lead a team in Somerset and West Wiltshire, supporting SME businesses. As Alistair said, we've been supporting this QES survey throughout 2020, and we're really happy to be involved. So thank you, Alistair, and thank you, Stephen, for the opportunity. So Graham Austin was meant to be on today, so he passes his apologies. But on the last webinar, for those that attended, he did mention running a project in Taunton Deane called Thriving Local Economies. And although, like most businesses, we've been impacted by COVID as well, local support does continue. We are committed to the project. And what we do see is the QES is a great way of listening to local business owners to find out what's happening on the ground and how we may be able to support you along with other organisations. With that in mind, what we've got today is a guest speaker from our insights team, Maciej. So I won't sort of steal his thunder, but he'll talk to you about the power of data, what we're seeing in the marketplace. And, you know, it may be that you've got some ideas already, but hopefully there'll be some fresh ones from Maciej. And even if it's something that you did know, maybe it's something that you're not applying and it'll just remind you of those things. So hopefully it'll bring something different to the discussion, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the session. I'm a big fan of trying to support businesses and finding ways to answer, you know, along the old adage of you only know what you know. And I think with the Thriving Project, if there's one thing that we took away from that, then it's that we've met a lot of people, both in the public and private sector, who are really bothered about supporting people and organisations locally. And I think the responsibility for us and others is really to signpost people to where you can reach out for that support. So please do go through the Chamber website. There's lots of members and associates that are ready to help. From a Barclays perspective, we're really looking to help you around the life skills side of things. We've now updated our life skills website. There's lots of information on there around SME businesses, well-being, working from home, mental health, CV building, self-serve modules, the lot. So, so please do look at it. And also, if you are tech savvy, look at the Facebook and LinkedIn sites that we provide. There's lots of recorded events. We recently had Karen Brady on there doing sort of boosting female entrepreneurship. Really good opportunity to have a look at some of those from some thought leaders across the UK and worldwide as well. So please do reach out to us. Please do reach out to the Chamber, as I said. And if you want to reach out to your own bank, that's okay. But if you want to talk to me or my team at Barclays in Somerset, we'd love to try and talk to you as well. So thanks for attending today. Enjoy the presentations, and I'll hand back to Alistair.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Nick. Right, one thing that I did forget to mention at the beginning, if you do have questions as we're running through any of these presentations, if something pricks up in your mind, we have the chat function on the bottom. It might be at the top if you're on an iPad. You can find the chat function if you've got any questions in there, if you can write in there what you would like to ask, and we'll come to those after the presentations. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to David Bharier, who is the Head of Research for the BCC. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Alistair. Hi, everyone. Great to be here again to talk through the results from Q3 of the Quarterly Economic Survey at the national level. What I'll do is I'll just share my screen. If there's any issues with visibility, just maybe drop Alistair a note and we'll try and resolve that. What I can do is give you a quick overview of the headlines from Q3, and then within the deck, touch on three broad areas. One, general business conditions, looking at how domestic sales and cash flow have looked in the quarter. Another theme around recruitment and employment trends. And then finally, looking at investment and confidence. As Alistair's correctly pointed out, this is the UK's largest independent business survey. And the real strength of the QES is simply because it asks businesses directly how business conditions are on the ground. This isn't a sort of an economic forecasting job for us. We're not trying to guess what's going on. We're literally asking businesses, how is your business performing in the previous 3 months? And when we aggregate that data, we get an enormous amount of insight on general direction of the economy within the quarter. I'll touch on some of the headlines, but just so you're aware, I mean, this data is increasingly important. Your input is absolutely essential to it, because we are increasingly under pressure from government and the Bank of England to provide the latest information about economic conditions. We're in a sort of world of acceleration in some respects. Things are moving very quickly and increasing in speed. Policy development at central government level is, again, going very rapidly. There's less time to think about wider strategy within government. So the demand for data has rocketed since the beginning of COVID. So one thing that's worth mentioning is that when the lockdown was introduced in March, we mobilised to implement a weekly impacts tracker, coronavirus business impacts tracker, to look at how businesses were responding on a week-to-week basis. So we've got a lot of data there as well to draw on. But in terms of the QES for Q3 2020, we received just under 6,500 responses from businesses across the UK. Somerset are a very strong contributor to that figure. And as I'll touch on some of the Southwest data comparisons as well for that comparison. The profile of the respondents to our surveys are relatively consistent from survey to survey. It's about 75% service sector, 25% manufacturers, overwhelmingly SME, and that's important to bear in mind because we're looking at the majority of the firms that are answering are SMEs. So we may miss, for example, one huge company that's doing brilliantly in the quarter. That sort of information can get crowded out, just so that you're aware. And we do have a lot of exporters within the Chamber of Commerce network, of course, but also in our surveys. The field work for this particular survey took place between the 24th of August and 14th of September. So it doesn't take into account some of the subsequent announcements around the job support scheme and further lockdown restrictions. But in terms of the very broad key headlines from the quarter, what we're seeing is that compared to the previous quarter, Q2 2020, which of course saw the largest and fastest declines in the history of the QES data set, Q3 has definitely seen an improvement across the board. However, the challenge is that most of the indicators that we measure are still technically what we call in negative territory, which means that more firms are reporting a worsening conditions or continue to report worsening conditions than an improvement. I'll touch on what that means shortly. So there has been an improvement in Q3, but it's not particularly substantial. And if you look at some of the sectoral breakdowns, particularly within the services sector, some of those indicators remain lower than even the worst quarters of the 2008-09 recession. And again, I'll touch on that shortly. This probably goes without saying, and not many people now are credibly claiming this, but there wasn't a V-shaped recovery in between Q2 and Q3, and certainly this data set would indicate that, even as lockdown restrictions were lifted in places. And a key point to make really is that while the overall picture remains negative, it has improved, but it remains negative. Some sectors are faring far worse than others. And I think this is a really essential point to draw out. So, for example, hotels and catering firms are consistently far more likely to report worsening conditions than, say, construction or even manufacturers. So that there are the imbalance of the distribution of impact is quite stark, according to our own data. So those are the very broad headlines. Looking at some of the business activity data that we collect, what we ask businesses very simply, over the last 3 months, have your domestic sales increased, remain the same, decrease? Same goes for export sales, same goes for cash flow and other indicators. Have they increased, remained constant, or decreased? Historically, we've represented that data in what we call a percentage balance form. So we simply deduct the percentage of firms reporting a decrease from those reporting an increase to give us an overall net balance of firms reporting an increase. So what we're seeing, if you look at the charts on the right here, historically, you can see where the big trends and shifts in the economy have taken place. Our data, the red line and the black line there, tracks very, very closely to official GDP growth data. So in the 2008-9 recession, you obviously saw a huge collapse in the indicators that we measure, as well as GDP growth. But since then, from about 2010 onwards, there's been a steady process of recovery. Now, in 2018-19, there were a couple of blips in our data where indicators looked as if they were dropping off a little bit. But I think we can attribute that, some of that, to longer term issues around taxation and cash flow and the cost of doing business increasing, but also the very short term uncertainty around things like Brexit. So that was the picture going into COVID. Now in Q2, our indicators, you can see that line drop dramatically. Our indicators fell to some of the lowest levels on record in the history of QES, and all within 1 quarter. So the scale of decline in Q2 was monumental by our own data standards. And as Alistair correctly points out, it's quite a simple equation, really. If you shut down the UK economy, most firms are going to report worsening sales figures, cash flow, investment. Everything goes off a cliff. In Q3, we've seen those figures rebound to a mild extent, but not really. Personally, I wouldn't make the claim that we're in a sort of recovery phase based on this data. I think what we're seeing instead is a slowdown in the scale of decline, and I'll highlight what that means shortly. If we were to see a V-shaped recovery, this is purely hypothetical, it's academic this point, but if we were to see a V-shaped recovery, technically this is what would need to happen in the data. You would need to see an overwhelming number of firms report increases in the previous 3 months, because things couldn't have got any worse. And if they'd made £0 in Q2, and even if it was £2 in Q3, that would technically go down as an increase. So you would expect businesses to, in high numbers, to report increases. Instead, that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing underlying all of that data is that almost half of firms have reported a decrease in their domestic sales. Again, this is overall. There are definitely examples of businesses doing very well over the last 3 months, and I'll say a few words on that shortly. But overall, we still have almost half of businesses in Q3 report a decrease in their domestic sales. If you compare that against the previous bar, Q2, that has definitely come down. So 73%, 3/4 of firms last quarter said that they'd seen a decrease in their sales. That has thankfully fallen. That trend hasn't continued. It's reduced, but nevertheless, there are still almost half of firms overall reporting decreases. Last quarter, only 10% of firms reported an increase in sales. That number has risen now to 27%. So there is definite growth in the number of firms reporting increases. And I would from the commentary that we get back from businesses across the UK, some of that is because things couldn't have got any worse from Q2. Other things include businesses that are doing well because they're servicing the crisis economy. So they're, setting up delivery, they've seen an increase in delivery services, for example, or they've repurposed their manufacturing lines to produce ventilators, things like that. Some other businesses have reported we're seeing growth because of the support packages that were announced, or the reduction in stamp duty. So there is a core group of businesses within our survey that are saying things are getting better, which is good. But the overall trend still seems to be that a lot of businesses, the vast majority are either reporting no change on pre-Q2 or indeed a decrease. And if you look at it compared to pre-COVID quarters, you can see how different things are still. Comparing the Southwest against the national data, what we find is a very similar alignment across most of the key indicators between firms in the Southwest and firms overall nationally. That in general, firms in the Southwest across some of the measures seem to be a bit more confident overall than firms nationally. But as you can see here from the domestics, so this question is, have your sales increase, remain constant or decrease? What about export sales? You see there that it's basically identical from the national and the Southwest perspective. They're both answering in the same proportions. The comments, as I said, with the comments that we got back on the change in sales in the quarter were very interesting. So we do get businesses saying that they've experienced an increase in sales in the last 3 months. So for example, a retailer in Somerset, bottom right here, said that their home delivery business has more than doubled since the beginning of lockdown. So there's been clear growth in those sort of businesses, but other businesses across the country are continuing to say that they're not making enough money to continue going. So there's a service firm in Birmingham there, and another quite a big firm in Birmingham, 100 employees, saying that they've seen a loss of revenue stream and businesses not investing in new technology. So there's quite a lot of different types of comments, but again, overall, the picture is quite honestly quite negative for a lot of businesses. In terms of cash flow, we're seeing the same sort of picture. So we asked businesses, have you seen an improvement or a worsening in cash flow? Again, more firms have reported an improvement in cash flow, but it's still not as strong as we'd like. And the pressures that exist for businesses on their cash flow seem to be coming from quite a few directions. So for example, we get comments from businesses saying that payment terms have increased, so clients are taking longer to pay their fees, or indeed businesses are not paying at all, which obviously has a massive impact on cash flow. Some businesses saying that the tax burden has compounded the impact of cash flow. So a business in Lincolnshire saying that a reduction in VAT would help with their cash flow. It would help employ a person entirely based on the cost of VAT. But then other comments are flagging up the issue around potential further restrictions and the impact of that on cash flow, loss of revenue, continued paying out of salaries, tax obligations, rent, etc. It's a simple mathematical equation in that sense. So looking at recruitment and employment, we asked businesses, have you attempted to recruit in the quarter? And we have seen an improvement in the number of firms attempting to recruit. It's gone up from 25% in Q2, which was the lowest level on record, back up to 37% in Q3. So there is growth in the number of firms attempting to recruit, and that's positive. And there has been a reduction, or a stabilization rather, in the expectation of change over the next 3 months in the size of their workforce. So in Q2, we had 29% of firms expecting to reduce the size of their workforce over the next 3 months. As you can see there, it's spiked up from the historical average of maybe 6 to 8%, natural churn perhaps, but it spiked up in Q2, 29% of firms expected to reduce their workforce. That's come down slightly to 19%. So I think things have stabilized a little bit in terms of the employment picture. However, again, when you look at the commentary that we get back from businesses, there's a lot of anxiety about the withdrawal of support, particularly the job retention scheme. And again, this was taken before the job support scheme was announced. But I think what we found consistently was that there was high levels of usage for the job retention scheme, and it was an effective scheme. It was simple to use. Businesses were getting paid by HMRC on time. There were no major issues, generally speaking. And so you've got a lot of businesses saying, we don't know what's going to happen after the job retention scheme is ended or closed. We are going to have to look at downsizing, making staff redundancies, etc. So there's a lot of anxiety there. Looking at the Southwest data around recruitment, again, it's about the same as the national figures. So 35% of firms in the Southwest attempted to recruit in the quarter. And firms in the Southwest are also slightly more likely to say they're at full capacity than firms overall. So I think the capacity measure that we use obviously dropped off a cliff in Q2. So businesses were simply not anywhere near capacity. But now we're starting to see that indicator pick up. And in the Southwest, it seems to be picking up a bit quicker than nationally. Finally, looking at investment and confidence, what we find here is that, again, there has been a mild improvement in the percentage of firms expecting, or the percentage of firms reporting improvements in investment, particularly for plant and machinery and staff training. But it's still, quite honestly, if you look at it in historical terms, at the lowest levels on record, pretty much. So investment, I think, is still, there has been a mild improvement, but it's still very worrying overall, because obviously if you've got a continued reduction in the number of firms investing, that has major implications for long-term recovery and how we get out of the crisis situation. When we look at business confidence, we see that that has started to improve quicker than other indicators. So more firms now overall are confident that their turnover will increase over the next 12 months. We also have a measure of confidence on profitability, which is less optimistic, perhaps related to the cash flow situation, but firms are slightly more confident than than Q2 that their turnover will increase. And if we look again at the Southwest versus national figures there, again, there's slightly more confidence within the Southwest. So in firms in the Southwest, 45% of them are saying that they expect their turnover to increase over the next 12 months compared to 41% overall. So there's a bit of additional confidence in the Southwest, and indeed for a slightly higher number of firms reporting that they're increasing investment as well. I would say that it's not by a substantial margin. These are probably very mild differences between the Southwest and national data, but if we do see this trend continue, that might have some implications for how different regions are recovering. And then I'll just leave you with a couple of thoughts on from businesses on the challenges that they face when reopening their business. And this is where the sectoral impacts are really felt hardest. So a lot of retailers, a lot of hotels, catering firms here telling us that they are really concerned about being able to reopen. So, for example, a small shop in Manchester saying that they can't reopen until it's totally safe to do so, but they don't have the funds to make it totally safe. A sole trader in Somerset, bottom left comment here, they supply gaming equipment to the pub sector, and they've had zero income. And even if pubs are reopening, sanitisation rules mean that they're probably less likely to be procuring gaming equipment. So that introduces a compounding challenge for that business. And then other firms, live events businesses, are saying that they're the first to close and one of the last to reopen, and they don't know what's going to happen once furlough ends. So there's a lot of anxiety about how businesses from particular sectors are going to reopen. And I think that's the key thing to draw out of all of this, that the impact is being disproportionately felt on businesses that rely on physical groups of people to service their to provide their services. So any business that relies on physical space has had a double whammy of a lockdown plus the implementation of social distancing regulations. So I think that's where we probably need to, well, certainly the government, we're advising the government to look closely at the sectoral imbalances there. But I'll just pause there in case there are any thoughts or questions.
Thanks, David. Sobering stuff. Interesting to see the kind of direction of travel. I guess we'll get more of an even better picture once we get the results of the next QES in to see what happens with that graph, whether it continues up in the direction it's going or whether it's going to flatten off. You've got to wonder whether with the extra lockdowns that are potentially coming in at the beginning of next week, it's going to have a large impact on obviously some of those businesses. Okay, thanks, David. I have got a couple of questions on the chat, so I will come back to those actually at the end if that's okay. So now I'm going to bring in Maciej Partyka, who is Head of Insights for Barclays. Maciej is going to talk about COVID and the Brexit insights that Barclays get from around the country and some concerns around those implications and obviously discussing the challenges. So I'm going to hand over to Maciej. If he's still.
Yes. Of course, the usual thing, yes, obviously I was on mute, yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and I'm delighted to be able to share some of the insights to really complement what sort of a very comprehensive view of the state of the economy and the UK businesses sort of David presented. I'm really going to try to do a little bit more of a sort of painting more nuanced picture. What we do is we don't run this huge scale surveys to really test the mood of the nation, of the business nation. What we're trying to do most of the time is trying to implement, to complement the big insights, for example, like Chamber of BCC is doing with our own more in-depth understanding human stories behind those large numbers. So what I'm going to talk to you today are responses from the research projects we did on small businesses we hold in our dedicated small business insights community. We run a panel of around sort of 1,400 businesses from the northern islands of Scotland to Land's End, who really sort of tell us to help us to understand as a big banking, what it is to run a business in the year of COVID and in the year of transition period. So it's really sort of something that I would like to share with you, what we heard from the likes of you all across the country, just to give you some perspective of what people are saying, hopefully to see whether those insights resonate. So if you go next slide. The main three topics that we'll be sort of covering today is really getting deeper under the skin of the COVID. Obviously, there's no denial. There's big impact on almost everyone. What we try to understand basically, what is more that's sort of helping some businesses do well or not to do so badly as compared to others in the COVID time. We're going to touch upon the topic of Brexit and actually how much small businesses across the country feel about the impact of Brexit on themselves, on their suppliers, and on the economy. Nothing about politics. And also because we are a bank with a lot of very clever people all across the country trying to analyze economy, the future, investment bank, what of our knowledge and common thinking we should be sharing with our business clients across the country, how much we would like to, they would like us to support them and help them understand and unpick what is really happening. So if we move to the next slide, this is really something that we looked at quite extensively. As we obviously know, we are one of the biggest payment provider across the country. We really want to understand the different stages of how businesses are affected by pandemic, and what we try to understand basically how we should support our clients who actually did quite well. Some of our clients who initially had a hit but managed to get their the business on track. But obviously, as David was mentioned, there are some businesses, especially in the entertainment travel industry, that really have not really had the chance to see any of the rebound of the business. As we are in Barclaycard, we're seeing that our credit card business is not really picking up because nobody's traveling, nobody's staying in those hotels, buying those dinners for their clients. So clearly we see huge impact on some part of the economy. We're seeing actually quite a huge impact. So what we did, we had a number of sort of online sessions with businesses who say that they did quite well in the economy, and we tried to make some deduction conclusions. What were the factors that really helped those businesses be more resilient to the COVID situation, to be sort of getting back on their feet quite quickly as compared to others? And obviously the number one factor without any doubt is basically what kind of business you are. If you are lucky enough to be in the business of, let's say, takeaway, packaging, delivery, your business was booming. We spoke to some business owners of companies that actually produce packaging for takeaway meals, not through any sort of specific actions on their side. Is basically their business naturally benefited from the COVID situation. Also, what we saw is there were other factors that really helped businesses, maintain really good situational cash flow in the time. So one of the sort of core factors some of our respondents mentioned was basically being in a position to actually have a lot of contracted commitments. And what we're seeing from other research, a lot of companies, probably yourselves, are looking into subscription model of paying for services or longer term commitments with your clients, basically to protect your income going forwards. Actually, we see that quite a lot of this was a very important factor in businesses looking at sort of how they want to run their business going forward, even when the COVID passes. Then obviously selling essential products that always are going to be needed, like food and energy. That's one of the key factors as well, where basically businesses really felt that were not that badly affected. Added value services like accountancy, tax advisory. Obviously, right now probably import-export advisory is something that almost like kept people going, kept people's businesses going, and helping them to maintain demand for their services. Obviously, in this uncertain year like 2020, where there were a lot of factors, throwing experience and throwing people's normal way of doing business into question. Obviously, some of the advisory services were quite needed. We just heard yesterday that actually the Brexit advisory was one of the best businesses in the country for advisoring businesses. Government advisory bill went up. So clearly when people don't know how to deal with the current situation, obviously that's a very good business to be in. What we found very interesting is one of the key factors that people quoted as being able to adapt quickly and sort of avoid disruption was having a family-run business. We spoke to several people who actually ran their businesses within the family, so they had no problems with closing premises, because clearly they just were able to keep on their business going out of home. They didn't have to socially distance because their children, their spouses or partners were in the business. So it was really sort of, on the one hand, easier because they didn't have to think about creating the safe environment to bring people from the outside, but also it was easier to get extra commitment, extra hours, and extra work from your family members who are still cooped up in home with you to do extra work which was needed. One was interesting also topics that sort of we heard about from the businesses. If people had quite a high proportion of their business costs related to the premises, basically the government support in paying for the cost of business basically really helped them a lot. So actually quite a lot of professional services firms that had high street presence and had to close, basically they rely almost like on subsidies to their business rents that should keep their business going. So quite an interesting observation as well. Obviously, there were sort of two other types of circumstances that really helped people. It was basically adopting very, very sort of easily to or quickly to the digital economy, on the virtual way of delivering services. Obviously, people who were able to adopt selling their products and services online really sort of were able to benefit, or at least utilize this ability to keep their business running in almost similar way. So some retailers who developed quite quickly the ways of selling their products online and delivering. We also saw this from a Barclaycard perspective in the growth of the number of our companies and actually clients who started accepting online payments. But also what we saw is some professional services basically very, very quickly started to realize that none of those services needed to be actually delivered in person or sold in person, because they're quite easy to also offer and sell online. And also some businesses who basically had a bit of a diversified portfolio of different things also that they said to us, it is possible to just pick some of the products that we could sell in the new world and actually just forego some of the products that require physical contact. So basically those businesses who felt that they were diversified in the first place were able to pick the winners in the business portfolio, so basically rely on them in the pandemic. So there wasn't a single recipe for success. Most of them was basically coming at what can you offer, but actually there was some there is some evidence almost like the setup and size of your firm was also quite important. And obviously, as ever, the core element of basically how inventive and how flexible as a business decision maker you are, basically how you are able to adopt and think on your feet to actually work with your business. It's also quite a crucial element. So if we go to one step further, obviously this year started with Brexit, the UK leaving the European Union. Obviously, it's going to end with Brexit. Will finishing the transition period. We asked businesses around the country about how they felt about the level of preparations for Brexit and different type of scenarios. We still don't know whether we'll have deal or no deal. First of all, very much in total agreement with what David said, is around 60% of small businesses we have on our panel told us actually they don't directly deal with EU, so they don't trade across EU. Therefore, really only 21% of our businesses in the panel expect very direct hit on their business. So clearly, because of the level of international trading that they do, basically the direct hit is very small. However, further 10%, so a third of businesses expect impact on their suppliers or their partners, and 42% of people basically told us actually they're quite worried about impact on the whole economy. And this is very much Brexit in this respect is very similar to the story we had from David a moment ago around it. Even if I'm not directly hit by problems, it's my suppliers, it's my customers, it's the overall economy that probably is really very much working as a one big connected system. And basically, it is almost impossible to isolate one's business from the broader system. So basically, direct hit on someone else's business could actually make their customers, go into trouble, which obviously has an impact on everybody's, business when the cash flow is so tight and there are so many different, problems with getting paid on time. So clearly, what we're seeing is whilst the EU trade might not be very important for most of the small businesses we spoke to, obviously they recognize that there might be some indirect impact on their suppliers, on their partners, and the wider economy. Obviously, there is, with the larger businesses, we see there's a lot more international trade, so basically the numbers are quite high, but even in the small business community, and actually a lot of small businesses supply services to larger businesses, so basically everyone is basically, trying to understand and assess those impacts. Also, what we found out is basically around 40% of people feel that they are prepared to either no deal or deal scenario, which obviously means that 60% are not quite sure that they are prepared already. And actually, today we'll be presenting some of our further insights in the bottom line on BBC Radio 4 and Evan Evan Davis program. So basically you might want to tune in today to actually hear some more insights around Brexit and COVID, that's coming from us. But what we also are concerned about is basically as a big organization that spends a lot of money in understanding the future of our country, understanding the future of our trade with the economy, we have quite a lot of good knowledge. And so we wanted to know to what extent small businesses and larger businesses wanted us to provide them with information. And if we flip to the next slide, we'll find that around 60% of small businesses told us they really wanted their banks to be proactively informing them about Brexit, whether this is around preparations for no deal, preparations for a deal scenario, whether it's about the new regulations of paying your suppliers in EU or getting paid by your suppliers in the EU, to understanding how we can start finding customers outside of the EU going forward. There was really quite a broad range of information that businesses really wanted from us. But also what we found out quite interestingly, they really wanted the banks to compile information that's coming from various sources in a simple and digestible way to inform them about, for example, what help is available from government. They really told us that they want the bank to really compile in a very simple and concise form is what actually government support is available, because they really sort of see that the information about this is quite scattered across different websites, organizations, institutions. So actually a bank is a good place to pull this all together. Now, we also asked them what kind of support, what sort of channel, as we call it in marketing speak, in normal terms, basically how they would like to be informed about what we can offer them, tell them about. And the most important and sort of the most commonly desired format was basically email update. Businesses told us that basically they want us to send them regular updates on COVID and Brexit and all those challenging topics via email. Also, we heard that some businesses wanted to be informed in direct mail, online articles, updates on social media. So really very much the remote channels, the channels that basically don't require interaction, really were preferred by small businesses. We were quite surprised because webinars only came distant third on at 23%. We basically believe that a forum like this where we had dialogue, conversation, we're able to ask and answer questions is probably a good way of exchanging knowledge and learning something about difficult and quite complex issues like COVID or Brexit. So it's something that we would really love to hear from you, whether this is something that you have a different take, because it's quite important for us to be able to come out and actually share our knowledge in the most digestible but also useful way for yourselves. So I think from the point of view of sort of adding some flavor to what we had, what we heard from David a few moments ago, it's really, this is a very difficult year. There's no denying. There are some people, because even in David's chart, 10% of businesses, and we'll see this in quite consistently, actually did well in the pandemic for various reasons. Some of them well deserved by the actions, some of them just by kind of pure lack of what kind of business that they decided to invest in. But also we see that with the uncertainty of the economy related to the COVID and lockdowns, there's additional uncertainty around the outcome of discussions of government with the European Union. So basically there's quite a lot of uncertainty, and there's quite a lot of information that's sort of disparate and it's all around. And basically we believe that what we're hearing from small businesses is basically there's a role a bank could play in putting things a little bit together and providing point of view, not just paying them loans from the government, but actually almost like advising or supporting in other ways. So that's really sort of what we're taking away from our research. It'd be really interesting to see if you have different perspective or similar perspective. Thank you. Yeah, so the last slide is really some additional sources of information around those two topics I mentioned. Obviously, it's provided with Barclays. We have quite a few very clever people dealing with those topics. Obviously, in the slides, you will be able to find some additional information and checklists.
Great, thanks very much, Maciej. Thank you very much. Very interesting to see the bank's insight and what you're hearing from your customers as well. Nice to see the Chamber of Commerce feature on there, somewhere down there. So it's certainly something that when we started to put together the sort of the COVID hub, that was very useful for business. So I think at the point where they're getting dedicated information from an information source, in this case kind of straight from the eagle's mouth in terms of Barclays, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm going to sort of open up the floor to questions. I've certainly got a couple of questions here. One, David, you mentioned that you had there was one of your charts that showed like-for-like sales quarter to quarter, and it was showing it coming from, I think, 76 to 46%, something like that. Is there a chance that businesses were reporting and comparing their sales to last year rather than last quarter? Is that a concern that you take into account?
So it's a good question. Thanks, Alistair. In the question we ask over the last 3 months, have domestic sales or export sales changed? So we're trying to capture the previous 3 months. Now, with all business surveys, the element of personal bias can creep in. So just hypothetically, if you've got a business that's technically seen an improvement in sales, but actually sees the overall picture as continuing to worsen compared to, say, last year, but there's a possibility they may record that as a decrease. So there's some of that. This isn't a administrative survey. We're not saying type in the number of sales that you make. We're getting the general sentiment. And so the general sentiment, I think, is still that almost half of firms see the picture as worsening for their sales.
Okay, thank you. I should point out, it was a good question. It wasn't my question. It was from Graham Crosby. Can't take credit for that one. In terms of the Southwest, we're quite heavily dependent on two areas that strike me as being at sort of opposite ends of the scale on this. One is obviously the hospitality and tourism sector. The other is the manufacturing sector. Are you able to sort of extrapolate any results from the manufacturing side and see how they're performing against national average?
Yeah, so nationally, I mean, I'd have to look at the Southwest data in more detail, but nationally, certainly manufacturers and construction firms are slightly more likely to report improvements than other sectors. I will say that there isn't a substantial difference among most of the sectors. They're all sort of holding steady at the same proportions of firms reporting improvements over worsening conditions. But manufacturers and construction firms nationally are more likely to report improvements. The outlier is hotels and catering. So they are dramatically more likely to continue to be reporting worsening conditions. In Q2, 94% of hotels and catering firms nationally said that they'd seen a decrease in sales. These are figures we've never ever seen before. We've never seen almost 100% of firms report a worsening in conditions. So I think that highlights how bad the situation was for particular firms within that. That figure has come down in the hotels and catering sectors, but it's still way above other sectors in the UK. So I think actually with the Southwest, there's probably that offsetting. If there's a greater share of firms that are slightly more likely to be reporting improvements, and if you've got a greater share of firms more likely to report worsening, it's probably balanced out in that sense.
Yeah, okay, fine, thank you. I'm going to throw the floor open. Did anybody else have any kind of burning questions you'd like to unmute or pop your hand up and ask a question? Oh, the tumbleweed is out. Okay. I'll keep going then. If we, Stuart, yes, Stuart from Journey 4.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Alistair. No, I was just I'm thinking back to last week's presentation from the Bank of England, and they were saying that in addition to hospitality, sectors like construction and transport were also performing significantly worse than some other sectors. I'm just wondering whether, David, you saw that in your figures as well.
Well, thanks, Stuart. In fact, our own figures indicate that transport and distribution and construction, again, are slightly more likely to report improvements overall. So it'd be good to have another chat with the Bank of England just to work out what sort of specific sectors they're looking at there. Yeah, so I mean, the free text commentary back from businesses who have reported improvements tend to be those businesses that are more that move to an online model or an online delivery model. So I think that's probably where some of the pickup in the transport and distribution sector may have come from.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Anybody else before I? Well, I can actually. We're very fortunate to be joined by Melindy Myers, who is the Bank of England Southwest rep agent. So, Melindy, I've asked on a chat if she'd like to come in on this. Melindy, over to you.
Hi. Okay, yeah, great. I've unmuted and unblocked my video. I'm mocking. So I first of all wanted to put something in about, I was trying to type it in, about the difference between the Southwest and the national picture and a slightly more optimistic picture in the Southwest. And I wonder if that's because we have a preponderance on hospitality and they've had quite a good season over the summer because of pent-up demand, staycationing. The Southwest is a bit of a magnet for tourism. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think this season's been extended a bit into September, October, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the fourth quarter. And then the other question was about construction and transport and stuff. So we actually, I mean, in the Southwest, my business contacts in manufacturing construction generally said things are going quite well. The recovery's been pretty good, but as David said, they're still a bit below where they were kind of say pre-COVID or same time a year ago. So there's still kind of 5 to 10% below. So there's that sort of bittersweet thing of recovery from Q1 has gone quite well, or, you know, from the early days of lockdown has actually gone better than expected, but they're still below where they were a year ago or pre-COVID. So it's about the sort of short-term versus medium-term perspective and kind of whether that better than expected improvement in Q2 feels stronger than the overall drop compared to Q4 2019.
I guess, is it a sticking plaster over that quarter two results?
Yeah, and generally businesses, you know, business and professional services, construction, manufacturing, generally the sense is it'll be early to mid 2021 before they kind of, more early 2021 when they'll get back to pre-COVID levels. But there's so much uncertainty around that because it depends on whether you have more lockdowns, you know, what happens with Brexit, blah, blah, blah. So I think, David, you mentioned kind of higher levels of uncertainty than normal. But equally, as you said, you know, I've heard quite a lot of online delivery stuff and some hospitality that are, you know, just incredible levels of demand compared to the same time a year ago. It's just kind of, does that recover all the lost activity in Q2? So I can't give you a dead clear black and white answer.
Oh, it's outrageous. Bank of England lets us down again, Melindy. David, over to you.
I think that's quite a good summary, Melindy. Thanks for that. Looking at the data, looking at our national QES data, I think one indicator that may give us an idea of where things are going over the next few months is around investment. And certainly there, production and manufacturing firms are more likely to be saying that they're investing in plant and machinery and equipment. Again, the firms least likely to be reporting improved investment are hotels, catering, other service sector firms. And I think that's probably where we might start to see the two-speed recovery take place. Businesses, again, that have been most impacted by COVID on probably three measures. One, the lockdown itself. Two, the implementation of social distancing regulations. And three, long-term changes in consumer habits, so people moving online, death of the high street trend that was already in existence before COVID. These things have accelerated. So any business that's exposed to those three factors is going to have the toughest time. They're going to be the hardest hit and then the toughest time to recover. Whereas businesses in the manufacturing sector that are able to adapt, are able to, they're not particularly exposed to congregations of large numbers of people. They can refit their plan. That tends to be where more investment seems to be going.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And that actually answers the question, I think, in part at least, that Stuart had literally just asked me privately there around where investment will be focused on, for companies that are thinking about investment. If you were to look at a manufacturing scenario, is it going to be on skills or is it going to be on equipment, do you think?
I mean, from the data, it seems to be on plant machinery and equipment rather than necessarily wider staff training and skills. What we're seeing with investment for training, for staff training, is still relatively low levels across the board, across all sectors. Yeah. So I'd say probably if you're looking at where investment's going, at least according to our data, obviously we've got official business investment data from the ONS and the Bank of England, but from our data it tends to be on plant and machinery and equipment.
Good. Okay, thank you. Marcus, I know you had a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, Marcus?
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. Thank you. And yeah, great presentation. I was struggling to keep up with all the figures going on. Mine's probably, I've got a couple of simplistic questions actually. One, talk about the Southwest. I'd like to know how, just one, the definition of the Southwest, because you ask different people, you'll get different answers on what the Southwest is and what isn't the Southwest. But then also, how much can you scale that Southwest data down in your wonderful databases? Could you come up with Somerset? Could you come up with Devon, Cornwall, things like that? Because obviously each part of the Southwest will probably have been affected or recovered slightly differently. When you talk about businesses as well, obviously, we think about business employees and everything else, but there's probably an awful lot of property companies who are clients of your bank who would class themselves as a business, and particularly those high street landlords and everything. And just wondered what their what their feeling is. Two, how helpful are they being? Because you get different stories from different people depending on who you deal with, and also how supportive. I assume the banks are being extremely supportive of their high street landlords, but how long do you think that lasts, or is there going to be a mass bailout out of town centre properties, which could then leave prices reducing and then all sorts of things happening, and we could have, with all due respect to vape shops and tanning parlours, you could have every shop as a vape shop, a tanning parlour, or bookmakers, well maybe not bookmakers anymore. And then I've got another couple of questions, so that sort of links into the finance side of things. Is people's worry Brexit? Because people talk about Brexit, and they might talk about Brexit on the manufacturing and the exporting side. But I wonder now whether people are no longer worrying about Brexit, but actually worrying about, do we bother doing anything now till March? And that's not just in the hospitality, leisure and tourism side, but generally, is everybody sort of throwing their hands up in the air already thinking, well, let's forget about Christmas and let's just hope we can get to March in one piece and start again? And also, one question, you talked about a lot of businesses, but I do see banks as a business. And I'm hoping the banks are quite robust here and got the Bank of England to help them out. But how long does this go on before, as a business yourself, you start struggling without major government initiatives? Thank you.
Okay, bit to unpack there. I'm going to come to Nick probably first in terms of the high street and what's going on there. Nick, is that something you'll be able to pick up?
Yeah, sure. So I think the overall message is that we are proactively trying to support businesses, the government, UK finance, Treasury with coming up with the right solutions and the right answers. So obviously, wherever we can help and support, we will. I think that things like the current VAT cuts are helping businesses, which is providing some sort of lifeline. Obviously, moving forward, the government are going to announce into the new year a recovery scheme. We're supporting that, and hoping that that helps with some of it as well. We're also looking at in our own. Obviously, I can only speak for Barclays. We're looking at those that we've supported within our business and considering options around forbearance. So things like if customers are struggling to repay their loans, that we may look for extensions, repayment holidays, and the like. So I think that bearing in mind these are unprecedented times, we're all joining and working together as one to try and make sure that some of the fears are allayed and that there's some sort of recovery plan that supports and works for those businesses. It's difficult for me to comment particularly or specifically on landlords. I think in the overall economy, we're consciously aware of trying to support those businesses where we can would be the message I would give.
Okay. Yeah, it's a difficult one to answer on their behalf. I appreciate. One point I'll pick on before I come to David to discuss what the Southwest definition is. We had a call the other day that was, and one of the questions was asked, do you think businesses are worrying more about Brexit now? I think the feedback that we got on that was that actually if you've got an issue that's affecting the profitability in marginal terms for your business and turnover in marginal terms for your business, or potentially a catastrophic effect such as COVID, your eye is taken by the brightly shining COVID effect for the last probably 6 months. I think as and when we kind of come through COVID, it seems to be that businesses will start to re-pick up Brexit, whether or not that's even before any sort of exit or transition period finishes. I'm not sure, and where we're going to go with a deal or a no deal or anything else is anybody's guess, I'm afraid. At the moment, I can't shed any light on that. So no news whatsoever.
Can I just come in on that? Is that okay? Yeah. So the question that Marcus asked was Brexit. Do we bother? And I think the answer is yes. So in terms of my encouragement to any business is consider your business resilience, talk to your suppliers and talk to your customers and find out what they're doing. So you need to consider your supply chain from beginning to end, and is it going to be impacted? And if there is any element of there being an impact, then you need to consider what you're going to do about it. No one saw COVID coming. And people have got caught short, and it could be the same for Brexit. So yes, be business resilient. And I think one of the things that was an interesting statistic that I heard recently was that 1 in 4 businesses have actually looked at their cash flow during the COVID crisis. Now I know we asked some questions in the QES survey about that, and there was a more positive response in the Somerset survey. However, within that, it did suggest that although there was a review of the cash flow, that people were behind their plans. So the accountants on the call, they'll all be quite pleased when I say, please do stick close to your cash flows and please talk to your financiers and accountants about your plans to stay tight. And just on that as well, Alistair, I think a clear message from both David and Maciej today has been those businesses that have been the winners have been those where they've refreshed, innovated or adopted new technologies. And that's what we're seeing specifically in the hospitality and leisure industry, the retail sector, the manufacturing sector. Rather than sitting on their existing business and waiting for it to go back to what it was, they're thinking of new ways, they're bringing in the new technologies, they're taking that time at home to refresh their websites, review their client bases and actually try and make themselves stronger. And I think that, for that with COVID, you should be doing the same for Brexit.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to quickly come to David to just talk quickly about what the Southwest looks like in terms of the BCC.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So the definition of the Southwest is the standard NUTS1 region definition. So it includes, Dorset, Cornwall, Somerset, Plymouth. Also includes Business West as the chamber that covers Bristol and the surrounding areas. Looking at the data, actually, when you break out the Southwest into the component chambers, Somerset and Business West are the big carriers of the response rates for the Southwest in QES. What you find actually is that Somerset are more likely than other regions in the southwest to report improvements. So I think that's probably a good news story there.
Excellent. We like that one. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll leave it there then.
Sorry, David, I did interrupt. Is there anything else?
No,
That was okay, fine. It was interesting, Nick's point about supply chain. It's something that I've written down, and Maciej, it might be something for you to come in on here. You mentioned that businesses had kind of reported that they didn't feel that they would necessarily be affected themselves. It was more their supply chain that would potentially be affected by Brexit. Do you think that's because they understand their business better, so they have more confidence in it, as opposed to maybe their understanding of the rest of the supply chain? Is the rest of the supply chain feeling exactly the same, do you think?
I think this is really mostly the rest about the supply chain, because if 60% basically they say they don't have any, personal, dealings with European Union. Obviously, this is not a very direct danger, but obviously what we also saw from David's presentation is the domino impact effect of sort of my partners getting in trouble because of something. Basically, it has direct impact, indirect impact on me. So clearly, this is about supply chains. This is really about people's ability to actually trade successfully with their partners, and basic ability to have those receivables not turning into debts and bad debts, as it was quoted again. So I think this is really more about people understanding more acutely how much of a sort of linked system UK economy is, and basically that impact on someone has a big impact on their part of the business, although they might have nothing to do with with the trade. So I think this is really something that's becoming very, very clear, and people are much more conscious about their partners. We're seeing a lot of small businesses who supply to larger companies are basically are sort of decision takers about how businesses pay them, how their larger customers are paying them, sometimes because they want to preserve capital, sometimes because they rely on their partners. So I think this was like a very important element, the 6 months, basically how much we all in the country rely on other people to help us lead our lives in a normal way. Basically, yes, as Nick said, there's a lot that individual can do to make their own fortune, but basically the entire economy is so much interdependent. Basically, it is becoming very, very clear that people are sort of opening up to the sort of the what if you learn economics at university, this is what will be taught to you. So that's really a very interesting aspect, how much of horizons are changed now.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Got another question from Graham around the kind of the triangulation of this information. David, it might be something for you to talk about in terms of where this information goes to government, and how do we get it listened to by government. I know that the BCC, the work that's done by the BCC, is listened to by government. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, happy to. And I would just make a point that it's great that some of the data that Maciej's presented is also consistent with what we're finding. So we're keen to make sure that where other partners are producing data, that we understand where the similarities and differences are, so that we've got a coherent narrative. But in terms of talking to government, this is the QES is sort of our primary data source for communicating to government on. So every quarter we will organise briefing sessions with the Civil Service, Treasury, Department for Business, the Office for National Statistics. We'll have separate briefing sessions with the Bank of England's monetary analysis team. In turn, they take our data and they use it to brief the Monetary Policy Committee, who obviously set interest rates. So our data for the Bank of England is hugely important as an up-to-the-moment source of information about the economy. So we do use it extensively, and we try to work cooperatively with government to make sure they understand it and that they're using it correctly.
So the horse is being taken to the water.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
Absolutely, yeah. Whether or not government are going to listen to it, and we're definitely not getting into any politics here, whether or not it's going to be listened to by any government, regardless of colour or persuasion, is a different matter altogether.
Precisely.
Yeah. I'm going to bring us to a close shortly, but I've got another quick question for David about productivity. Interested to know if the data comes, or this data includes anything on productivity levels with people working from home. I'm not aware that it does, but you might have an extrapolation.
It doesn't specifically, but there's it's a really interesting point. It's one that we're trying to grapple with. Maybe Barclays have some thoughts on this, but some of the comments that we got back from businesses actually did relate to the inability to measure productivity effectively now. So you've got certain sectors, particularly in the service sector, where productivity was already difficult to measure. In the manufacturing sector, it's much more concrete. You can measure the number of units produced per hour. Whereas in the service sector, things are a lot more vague, oftentimes. Professional services, as one example of that. And businesses in the survey have actually said to us, I'm finding it more difficult now that people are working from home. I can't monitor them. I'm not sure, what's going on. I'm not sure how to measure success or failure at this point. So there have been anxieties about that, but we haven't measured it in any statistical way. I would suspect that it's going to be a big source of interest over the next few months as we move to this model more permanently.
Absolutely, and certainly anecdotally, I think we certainly as a chamber we speak to a lot of different businesses. You can't pour concrete from home, you can't manufacture widgets from home, so that's going to obviously impact productivity. So you've got to get back into the workplace. With the advice being that you should work from home where you can. I think you probably initially saw certainly anecdotally from our point of view, you saw a peak in productivity. People were beavering away like mad. As we head into winter, as people kind of get a bit of lockdown fatigue and maybe working from home fatigue, it'd be interesting to see how that is impacted. Okay.
In the data that we do monitor, we're subscribing to another survey. We actually see that there's a growing concern about the mental well-being of employees who are sort of working from home, and actually a lot of business owners, decision makers, worry about this, basically, how they can sort of cope about the mental well-being. So this is a probably growing concern.
Yeah, completely agree, and I think that's echoed. I think the good thing is that actually over the last, especially 4 or 5 years, we've really started to talk about mental health in the workplace. And I think this is really going to accelerate that conversation. So I think we're hopefully in a much better place than we were if we were having this conversation 5 years ago to actually address some of these issues and start conversations with members of staff. Really, really important that we do that. Okay. I'm going to wrap this up because we're coming up to time. Thank you, as always, to Barclays, who support the QES for us. Always appreciated. Thank you very much to Nick and also to Maciej for your input and your insights. Thank you very much. Thanks also to David from the BCC. Invaluable insight, as always. So thank you very much and really appreciate your time. Thank you to all of you for being here today, and also if you completed the QES, please do, if you see it out there when it goes live next quarter. David, you've got a date right in your mind for when the next one goes live, haven't you?
I believe it's January the 6th for publication of Q4.
Lovely. So January the 6th, keep your eyes peeled for when that comes out. If you can share it via social media, excuse me, extol all your contacts to complete it. You don't have to be a member. The wider data set that we get, the more accurate the numbers, obviously. So we'll hope to see you on the next one of these next time we're holding this. Hopefully that tick will continue to go up, and we'll see continued positivity in the Southwest. But I would like to say thank you very much for you all being here today. Stay safe and stay well, and see you all soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alistair.
Thank you.
Thank you.